and like what's sort of an introduction for AI for communications. And if you happen to be at Voices in New York, I talked there in a presentation there. This is a more like updated and condensed version of it. And I want to start with a major term that's quite important to understand. For many years, we are seeing something that we can call predictive AI. So artificial intelligence already plays a big role in many things like weather forecasts, like fraud detection for credit card companies, or social media streams. So it's already used in many cases, but it's more in the background. It's like it's working there. You don't really see it, and it has the name predictive AI. And last year, with a lot more computing power and a lot more and better models, we could do something with predictive AI that seemed impossible before. And I brought an example here that hopefully makes this very easy to see. So with predictive AI, for instance, I could take a picture that's a real picture of a man. I could take this picture and ask AI, give me a description of the picture. And you can imagine this functionality was very helpful in the past. If you run a big social media platform, millions of pictures are uploaded every day. You want to have an understanding what's on the pictures, because if you have content guidelines, for instance, you want to really make sure you enforce them, right? So that's an example for predictive AI. And what you could do now is to say, can we actually turn the table? And can we say, let's take the description and create something out of this? So we take the description, and with generative AI, we have a way to create new content out of text, right? And that's what we all see now, and that how it feels like AI as coming from the shadow into the light. So much content, and it's on the picture side, on text side, on media side, that's everywhere. And that's sort of the revolution. It's sort of also a revolution that kind of hits, especially communications, because predictive AI didn't have too many use cases for communication. With generative AI, like this horizon really opens up in both sides, a lot of great stuff that will help the job and the profession, but also kind of a challenging side of things. And I will talk about this in a minute. So when we talk about AI now, I talk especially about generative AI, and I want to dive into the main directions there. And number one is something that all of you probably already know. It's about these large language models and things like ChatGPT. And for definitions here, first, ChatGPT is actually a chatbot app that's based on GPT-4. And GPT-4 is something that we call a large language model, or short LLM. And you can say like ChatGPT sort of standing on the shoulders of giants in this case, right? And the powerful thing here is this large language model, which comes from OpenAI, and it's pretty much, technically you would say it's a neural network that sort of generates all this stuff and is pretty much the core of what's actually happening. GPT-4 is from OpenAI, from the company, and ChatGPT is also from OpenAI, but there are other vendors out there who are also doing this. Microsoft doesn't have its own large language model. They are using the model from OpenAI. So GPT-4, that's, by the way, it's also what, if you use Staff-based and Staff-based Companion, we are using the OpenAI model hosted by Microsoft. Google has a large language model that's called Palm 2, and the Google chatbot app is called Bard. And there are a lot of, as I said, other large language models. One example is Meta, like from Facebook. Their LLM is called Llama, right? And these are out there, and you can expect like this space to explode with a lot more of these models. And right now, if you ask like, what's the best one? The best one is actually really from OpenAI, it's GPT-4. This creates the best results. But if you would ask me, what is there a contender? Probably it's going to be Google in the near term. Google's working on a new project there. They call it Project Gemini. So their next large language model, probably coming out somewhere later this year, is going to be an entirely new model. They put in a lot of effort to make this great. Like it was a big wake-up call to have ChatGPT there. So we can expect a lot of innovation in this space. That's what I'm saying. very interesting times ahead. And right now, GPT-4 and ChatGPT are like leading the pack here. What is it? I guess many of you have already started to use it and try it, and we'll talk a bit more later about like what's prompting guidelines or how can you prompt this to really work well. I want to give you here one aspect that I find really interesting and also something maybe to look forward for the next models. If you ask ChatGPT, write me a text. You can also say, imagine you are a specific person. That's really interesting because you get a certain style of writing, right? I said like, you're JFK, write me an invitation for an internal company safety training, and you get like, how would JFK have written this, right? And then you see here, I've said, okay, now imagine you were Stephen King, right? And it's pretty much rewriting this in the style of Stephen King. And by the way, I was really surprised look at this sentence from Stephen King. I need to check here. This is our chance to draw the curtains of ignorance and shed light on the corners of our office that often stay in the shadows. Who's ever written such a nice sentence about company safety traits? The point is that I wanted to make here, if you look at the second prompt, if this prompt would stand alone, you wouldn't know what this is all about. Like the application wouldn't know that it's about a safety training. So what it does, it keeps the context of it, right? So it understands, okay, the first question was about a safety training. Now, Stephen King, probably it's still about a safety training, and I try to change the style. So what we say here or can talk about here is a so-called context window. So the big innovation as part of this is this application can keep the context over a couple of prompts. That's why it feels like a real conversation with sort of a human, because the chat can stay in the context and answer based on the context we've provided before. And this context window also with every version gets bigger and bigger. GPT-3, the model before, had a context window of about 2,000 words. And GPT-4 has now a context window of 25,000 words. And Google already published like a paper where they say, how can we do a context window of 1 million words? And if you think about like, how can these models get better, like one major thing will be the context of it, right? Imagine you're going daily to ChatGPT and you're prompting things, and it would remember things you prompted 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, or at some point it would say, hey, Frank, like 3 years ago, you did this other text. It was like, maybe we should take this into account and so on. The longer the context window will be, the more natural and the better this whole thing will be, right? So as one hint for new models coming out, you could ask, hey, what's the context window here? Like, how did it actually goes this further, right? And the question is like, does ChatGPT know certain personalities, major characters? Yes, it knows. Whenever a character has created a lot of content, like all like US presidents, for instance, or major writers, it will have all the content and it can impersonate. If you say impersonate myself and ChatGPT doesn't have content of you, it cannot impersonate you. With the context window, you can do things like I give you text of mine and say, here like 10,000 words of text I've written, analyze my writing style and give me the text in my writing style, right? But the more text there's available, the better ChatGPT can impersonate things. So why is this good for comms, or what's interesting? It's interesting in like two major dimensions, I would say. One is write better content faster. And there's actually numbers out there, like here from Jacob Nielsen. He's one of the UI, UX research heroes out there. And they've done tests and they say you can speed up the writing process of up to 59%, especially the brainstorming and drafting part. Editing will have to be done by humans because especially in comms, you need to make sure whatever you put out is correct, right? But still, it will speed up the process and will be a great help. And the early results we see, also a lot of early tests that we are doing ourselves, it's going to be very helpful. And that's also why we're pushing it so hard to bring it into the staff-based platform. Writing gets better. And the other thing that gets better is the whole research part. don't use it as like a Google search engine and search for specific things. I think Google's way better here, but it's great for summarizing things, right? So if you want to have to research about a certain topic, you can use a prompt like this one, like to say, what are the most important studies from the past years? List this here, right? Many know the data is only until September 2021. So if studies are like later, it will not be included. Hopefully in the future that will be the case. But it's great to sum up things. If you want to test something like this, you can also take the annual report of your company, put this into ChatGPT and say, write me a 50 or like 500 words or 200 words summary. It's really great at summarizing, condensing things. So that's really powerful in the way. So we talk, I think we've shown this many times before. A way to think about this is to say there are positive impacts, and a lot of them are what I just talked about, like faster research, better, easier creation. For comms, this also means it helps to enable local editors to write better content. And it will also help in many ways to provide employee services like an employee chatbot where you can ask things with natural language, like where's my benefits overview and so on. It will help employees find things better and faster. On the other side, we also have a lot of like potentially negative things that are going to happen. Like one obvious thing is if comms right now in a company is only like the writing office, a lot of middle managers might say, okay, I can write stuff myself now with ChatGPT. I don't need comms anymore. So comms, I think, pushes comms a bit to be more strategic in this regard. Misinformation will be a challenge in many ways. And I think also authenticity will be a challenge, and the whole amount of content, because it's easy to create content. A lot of us are already drowning in too much communication. That's why that will be a challenge here as well. But in general, I think, especially on the text side of things, much more exciting than it's scary in this regard. And that's why also we want to encourage everyone here, go there, test it, and see it for yourself. On the media side, so generative AI, text, and now we talk about media, it's pretty much the same underlying models. That's why we see there a lot of also change and development in the past couple of months. And especially with pictures, you see tremendous progress there, where pictures are looking now lifelike pictures, really hard to distinguish what's fact or fiction anymore. And there's also with one of the leading tools, there, Midjourney, there are some nice trends that I personally really like. So one trend is on the left, the celebrities in everyday jobs, like Brad Pitt as a construction worker, or Tom Cruise at the supermarket. Or another cool trend is the historic selfie trend. So there's a lot of selfies from historic events. I think it would be that's a great way to sort of spice up a bit like the history lessons at school probably in the future. I show this because I want to show to you, I think that's art, and the whole discussion, is this all fake, or can AI be art? I think the creativity to come up with these ideas and create these pictures, that's already art in itself, and it just shows what's possible with this modern AI image generators. Just in terms of what's out there in the market, there are a couple of these generators. Midjourney is one, DALL-E is one. DALL-E is the one from OpenAI, and we have Stable Diffusion. These are like the three main ones. And right now we have a pretty clear winner here. And I can give you one example. We did the example with the question, show me a picture of the Pope in New York on a skateboard. And that prompt, we put the prompt into DALL-E. We put the prompt into Stable Diffusion. So you see like very basic pictures here, like looks a bit broken also in that regard. And if you go to Midjourney is actually really, really good in that regard. So And that's something we'll see much more in the future. And by the way, for this picture, I know it's pretty small, but the right hand of the Pope here has 6 fingers. That's usually one of these things where you say, oh yeah, it's AI. Most of them come now at a cost. Midjourney is a cost. I think it's $10 a month or so in terms of the cost. So the challenge is seeing was believing, not anymore. Many of you may have seen this fake image of the Pope. 2 things here that are important. One is you see an emerging trend that media companies are like labeling these pictures and saying generated by AI. Maybe that's also a way forward to deal with these pictures, to make sure, like a watermark, to make sure, hey, be careful, that's an AI picture. And the other one that I wanted to highlight here, this picture was created by a 31-year-old construction worker from Chicago. So everyone now, you don't need to be a media specialist, everyone now can create these pictures. And there's no way you can distinguish them anymore. And while the picture of the Pope might not have had a lot of bad outcomes, there are other pictures. Maybe you've seen this. A couple of weeks ago, there was this picture of a supposedly a fire or explosion near the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And this was a fake picture. But with this picture being distributed on fake channels on Twitter, the stock market, I think, went down 2%. And so until they realized, oh, it's actually a fake picture. And we all will see a lot more of this, a wave of these sort of fake stuff coming up. And that's something that's a real challenge for communications. That's definitely something you will have to deal with. And that's something that will be a challenge in your roles, right? So for social media, there was a question, do you need to say they were made by AI? You don't have to give credit. No. First, for instance, for Midjourney, there is a subscription where you can, if you pay a bit more money, you can use this, take the pictures afterwards and use it for wherever you want to use it. There is not a current, let's say, guideline on how to market and say, where is this coming from? There is an emerging good practice to say image created by Midjourney and generated by, and then maybe even a person, if a certain person has created this picture. So there's some emergent rules, but no hard rules yet how to mark these pictures. So the question is AI an opportunity or a threat? And especially which rules do we need, or what are the action points, especially from a communications point of view? And for that, I wanted to give you 2, because I know a lot of writing out there, about pros and cons and the challenges, 2 smart things that I want to show here. One is a very smart presentation by Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin. Tristan Harris is pretty well known. He is the author of The Social Dilemma. It's a Netflix documentation about social networks and how they work and how this engagement algorithm really sort of starts to destroy societies and why it's so dangerous. And they have, in March, they've done a presentation. It's called The AI Dilemma. It's, if you look for more cautious, pessimistic point of view, that's the smartest presentation I've seen. So I can highly recommend that to have a look at that. The main thing that they do there is pretty much, we'll share the links in the chat. Yes, happy to do so. The main thing that they do there is to say, for social media, in the first thing, it looked really nice, and it looked like give everyone a voice, connect with your friends, and join like-minded communities and so on. But then we've seen there's actual behind the nice face, there's a small monster, and addiction, disinformation, and so on. And then they say, but even behind that, there's a much bigger monster, and that's this engagement monster that pretty much entangles every part of our society. And now really has a lot of like negative impact in many ways on our society. And I think that's a really smart analysis, and they pretty much do the same thing with AI. And they say, on the first side, AI has a lot of good outcomes and a lot of interesting things. On the second, there's sort of some challenges that we see, but the real monster here is again entanglement, and it will be it's a race for intimacy. Like AI services want to be your personal best friend or your personal service, and will define a lot of things in your life, right? So I can highly recommend that if you have the time in that. And the other one, that's the more optimistic view, also very smart, very thorough, and a great read here is from Mark Andreessen. He's a venture capital, one of the co-founders of Andreessen Horowitz, and he's written this article about like why AI will save the world. And I can also highly recommend this because he goes into all the upsides and also the potential downside, and is really good argumentation why this is good. So if you say, I want to understand the spectrum and I want to really have the smartest people teach me something, that's something I can definitely recommend. And talking about smart people, here's my third recommendation, and that's also a nice like mental model to think about it, is from Nicholas Thompson. He's the CEO of The Atlantic. And he does something that he calls the most interesting thing in tech. It's like a daily video. He's recording mostly somewhere in public spaces. And it's really funny to watch this, and really interesting, really very smart guy. And he did this one about AI and the challenges of AI, and should we regulate AI, right? And he was pretty much saying like there are 3 buckets to think about. And the first bucket is there will be near-term challenges. And the near-term challenges will be around accelerating things that already are a challenge to us as companies or society, right? So misinformation will be a challenge. Like you've seen the pictures, like fake news will be a challenge, cyber security, hacking, and so on, right? Immediate things we need to deal with. It's already starting, and it will hit companies. I explained before, you need today about 2 minutes of voice of any given person to recreate that voice with AI and make that voice say anything you want, right? So it's very easy. The voice of all your CEOs is out there. It's very easy to create their voices, and then you can use the voice to call employees, commit fraud, and whatever you want to do out there, right? So there's a lot of things to be solved. The second one is the medium term, and he calls it like there will be a disruption of the labor market, especially more white-collar jobs. A lot of people where we never thought that could be like hit by automation. Also from the creative side of things, I've heard the example this week of an agency not doing photo shoots anymore. They do all the pictures in AI now, and all the post-processing in AI and so on. Like they save a lot of money, and also a lot of carbon dioxide and so on. Like it's a lot of good things, but it will hit creative jobs pretty hard. And that's something that's going to happen, right? And the question is, how do we deal with that as a society? And a lot of people are very optimistic that there will be more and other jobs be created, but it's still something to deal with. And the last thing is this more long-term thing, and everyone talks about this. This is the like, will AI kill humans at some point, or called the alignment problem, which is around like this misaligned AI might have a task like there's the famous paperclip thing, if you know about this. Like you go to an AI, to a powerful AI, and say, I need a lot of paper clips, and the AI will pretty much not stop at anything, will kill all humans, will pretty much burn down Earth just to create as many paper clips as possible, right? So that's the whole idea about a misaligned AI is not against humanity. It's just trying to solve a thing and doesn't see anything else. And he's pretty much saying the long-term thing, it might be interesting to talk about. We need to, like some regulation now, we need to think about this, but this is really far out there. Don't waste your time too much with this. Like focus on the near-term and the medium-term topics because they are important. We should deal with them. And that's also a bit of the setup that I've shown in my Voices presentation is to say, from a communications point of view, I can think about 5 things to be done, right? Define AI guidelines for the company, maybe in terms of what I've shown before, don't create artificial voices or artificial pictures of employees or leaders. Second, establish trusted comms channels because only trusted channels can actually make sure that you can distinguish fact or fiction. The individual content, the individual picture cannot be distinguished anymore. The channel will be the thing that builds the trust. Number 3, use AI, know how it works, and use it to make a better, faster job to increase your productivity. Number 4 is there's a great chance here to become an AI champion in your own company, teach leaders about what's going on, about the challenges and other things. I think communication is in a great place for that. And the last thing is around this, if comms is only like the writing office of the company, your job is much more in a challenge than being a strategic partner for the business, thinking about measurement, thinking about campaigns, thinking about strategic narratives. The more you think beyond that, the more you're in a supporting, enabling, strategic role, the less the discussion will be, can ChatGPT replace you?
I think this is probably going to be a bit more of a specific dive into the benefits of AI for internal communicators and communications at large, specifically thinking about, how we might be able to frame AI in our daily life moving forward, as well as potentially giving some prompts that we can work with, sharing our best practices and tips, and fielding any questions you all have. So if anything is coming up, please put that in the chat and we can address that as we move forward. But starting us off, I guess, Mina, you and I have been working together for a while, and you actually were the one that really piqued my interest in AI because you started using it pretty heavily as soon as ChatGPT came out, sending me poems and scripts and things. So can you describe how AI functions in your day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I've been playing around with it since about, I think, March. I'm not sure where it actually came out, but this is when I discovered it. And I was like, oh, there's this cool chat that I can talk to and ask anything, and it's going to give me answers and I can just do whatever. But I was very clueless about it, which I think most of us still are. Like, even though I know something about it and I'm still learning, I think we're all in this big unknown and not sure what's going on. So I think learning about it sooner rather than later is definitely going to benefit all of us in our jobs, but also in our lives. So yeah, fun fact about how I used, I think, ChatGPT for the first time was it was Alex's birthday, and I wanted to say happy birthday in a funny way. So I have asked ChatGPT to create a song. I think Shakespeare way. I think that was my style. And then I input a bunch of prompts about Alex, about who she is, what sign she is. So it created this beautiful poem. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I shared it with Alex and I was like, unfortunately, this wasn't me. I can't take the credit, but it was very, very creative, right? So that's a fun way how I started using it. And then later on, I realized that it's very beneficial for my job as well, being in sales and talking to people all day long. Sometimes, especially because English is not my first language, I think it's hard to get the message across. And even if I do, it might not sound in the style of the language, or something might sound more assertive than it is. So I'm using AI to kind of rephrase my emails, for example, right? So if I have something to say, I would put it in kind of a rough draft, and then I would put it in ChatGPT, and I would ask him to maybe rephrase it to make it more personable or make it more, friendly, or whatever tone that I want to use in that particular situation. So I think that has helped me a lot. I'm also using kind of different ones. I know Grammarly has an extension that's also kind of AI based.
Yeah.
It's helping me do it directly within the email, so I don't have to kind of go back and forth, which is super helpful. So yeah, I think that it's a very interesting realm of opportunities here. I haven't tested out the images ones. I know Frank was showing some great examples, which I think are pretty cool. I'm mostly kind of discovering this text generative AI, and I think that's what we're going to focus on more today.
Yes, absolutely. I think that in terms of generating summaries or drafts of content, that's been the main use case for me as well. I think really, in particular, personally, I think that the sort of tone surveillance has been very helpful in my emails. I know that often I can come across maybe a bit more direct in my emails. Maybe it is a way to soften it or to make sure that the tone is hitting in the way it needs to. Because I know that, like, for me, I always would have anxiety about emails and how to write them and what's going to be effective. And I can only imagine that that also transfers over to larger communications. If I were an internal communicator, let's say, ahead of the communications department, sending out content daily, wanting to make sure it was friendly and professional and persuasive, I might pull my brains out. So what we can do actually is, let me share my screen share, pop into.
While you do that, I just want to mention that I think another challenge for communicators is that they have to generate this text every single day, right?
Yeah.
That there is a lot of work they have to put in, even for day-to-day communication. So especially for that type of communication, I think it's most useful when it's HR update or new benefits update, something that's kind of more generic, but we need to input our information. I think starting off drafts from ChatGPT and kind of having that starting point is super, super useful because it helps you start, and it helps you save time. At the end of the day, all we want to do is save time and be more efficient. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits.
Yeah, it is very much sort of as Frank was talking about, like as an executive assistant or as another member of your team that you can delegate to make sure that you're streamlining your processes and your work streams as much as possible. So starting with a draft or starting from scratch is possible too, but really, making sure that there are another pair of eyes, figuratively in this case, checking your work and making sure that it's the most effective as possible. So what we do have here, just I think we covered most of it in terms of providing efficiency, sort of having it as a superpower skill and making sure that it's a collaborative, team member that you're working with in addition to your regular day-to-day. But there are a bunch of different ways that you can use AI in your work. I think today we'll be talking about generative AI and about, fine-tuning your prompts. As Frank mentioned, like it's great, and hopefully in the long term you will have like years worth of context in terms of the content that you've generated. But starting out now, what is it that we can do with what we have, with the tools available, free or not free, and how can we make our prompts, let's say, the most effective?
Yeah, I think we should dive into that. One thing that I would mention before we do so, and I think it's important because I think when all of this kind of the AI revolution started, most of us, I know I was kind of scared. Like, is this gonna replace my role? Is this gonna replace,
Right.
human role? It's also what Frank mentioned earlier. So many jobs are being replaced. Like photographers are not needed because we're generating AI images now. But I think that it's important to emphasize how important human touch is in internal communications. And I
Yeah.
know that from talking to a lot of communicators, from working with a lot of them, communication is something that's very sensitive. It requires emotion, empathy, critical thinking, and some of these things are unfortunately or fortunately, not supported by AI. So I think it's important to know that even though we have it as you said, like an assistant, right?
Mm-hmm.
We still need internal communicators at the forefront of every organization, and especially in internal comms. And another reason for it is because employees trust those people, right? They're the faces that they can turn to when they have a feedback or want to talk about sensitive subjects. So that two-way communication is also not really possible using an AI to replace. So I think it's important that we emphasize that
100%.
It's not something that can easily be replaced as a role, especially because it's so sensitive and emotional.
Yeah, and wide-reaching. There are many different facets to it than just, the content. Jennifer had a question in the chat about any programs that can help build a presentation when you're stuck. So great that you mentioned that because Jennifer, when we were creating this presentation, we actually used an AI generator. It's an extension in Google. I can find it and put it in the chat, or maybe Mina, you can find it and put it in the chat for you. But yeah, it generated some images, it generated a new theme for the slides, and you can input content, copy any of that data, and then it should intuitively create out the platform or the sales deck or the presentation. So that's something that we can put in the chat
absolutely.
there.
I'm gonna search for it and put it in chat. But I think it's very important that you mentioned this, Jennifer, because you'll see all of the images in our presentation are AI generated, and they're supposed to match the text that we had on the slide. So you'll see where some of the limitations, we didn't want to change the images just so we can keep it authentic, but just so you can see some of the limitations maybe when creating something like this. But it's a great starting point. We have to say it saved us a lot of time when we started.
If you're stuck and you need a little inspiration or a little bit of a laugh, this is where we can start from. And then Natasha, you honestly kind of read our mind. We might as well jump into this because we'll talk exactly about tone and about brand voice and how you could potentially weave those things together as you're creating content in AI. So we're going to start very basic, but how to generate AI prompts. Mina, take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So how this is going to be built out is we're going to start with a simple prompt, as you can see here, which is write a message to a new hire. And if you want to make this interactive and fun for all of us, you can also follow along in ChatGPT or Google Bard, whatever works for you. We have used ChatGPT when we were kind of testing this out. So essentially, we want to take you through a timeline almost of creating the best possible prompt to give you to get the most out of it, right? So if you're starting off and you don't know where to start, and you're like, oh, I need to write a message to the new hire, right? So the first thing that pops up is obviously write me a message that I can send out to my new hire, which is going to give you some results. And if you try it out, it's going to give you a very generic answer that you can then tailor. And exactly what Frank mentioned earlier is that you can continue adding more prompts to make the text better and better, right? So it has that context, so it knows what you already searched for. And if you're in the same kind of chat box, you can continue adding prompts to kind of tailor the text more and more. So we're starting off with a very simple write a message to the new hire. And then after that, we are adding what, Alex?
Well, we're considering the format. So as we go through, once again, this is very high level and sort of simple, but there are signposts that you can have as these would go with any prompt that you're making. So considering the format, a welcome email, an article, a bulleted list, a blog post, giving as much context to how you want the results to come in so that you can further tailor and further refine, and also to make sure that, later you don't have to reformat if it's bullet points. And I'm sure as AI goes on, it becomes more comprehensive in terms of layouts and things. So write an email to a new hire. And then, as I said, you want to be specific. You want to be very, very targeted and sort of define the results. Are you looking for numbers? Are you looking for a specific topic or subject. So write a welcome email to the new hire explaining the onboarding process at ABC company. And there, maybe you're going to add the website of the company or other things like that if you wanted to. But that will, I mean, when we put this in, Mina, it very quickly was like, oh, I know exactly. And then it became, it was actually quite impressive.
And I would emphasize be specific. Like, this is just one example of how you can be specific, but more specific you are, the better outcome you will get, right? So here we have this kind of explain the onboarding company at the ABC company, but if you know your onboarding process, this is where that human touch comes in, and you can say like, explain the onboarding process in a way that on the first day this is going to happen, second day this week, whatever. Make it really, really personable to your organization and how your processes are working, because ChatGPT wouldn't know that, right? It will know how to generate a generic message to the new hire, but it wouldn't know how actually the onboarding process looks like at your organization.
Yeah. And it can pull external data too sometimes. I mean, once again, be cautious in that sometimes data is not up to date, as with ChatGPT stopping at 2021.
Exactly.
But I know we've done this, or when I've played around with this, even in generating content for our company, for staff base, it has access to the external messaging and the external data. But obviously, if you're doing internal messaging to a new hire, you have a bit more specific things to cover.
Exactly. And I think that ChatGPT gives better results if you ask me. Like, I was comparing ChatGPT and Bard. I like ChatGPT more. It seems more realistic. Bard, the only kind of advantage I see in Bard is that it has up-to-date knowledge, right? So if you're looking for any kind of statistics or anything in the latest 2 or 3 years, Bard is going to be the way to go, just because literally the knowledge is up to June of 2023, right? So yeah, just another thing to kind of consider there, depending on the outcome that you want. Yeah, and then another important thing is to define the length of your text, depending whether you are sending an update that you want to post on your intranet, or you're sending an email newsletter, or it's a Slack communication. You want to define how long you want the text to be. Some ideal email copy lengths are between 50 and 125 words. And apparently, based on the research, this is affecting more open rate and read rate by 50%, which is pretty high percentage. But yeah, keeping it short and sweet and concise will also kind of increase that readership. So you can always define how long do you want your text to be.
Yeah, and that would be leveraging your expertise as a communicator, knowing which piece of content or which format lends itself to shorter, longer, etc. James had a great question in the comments about, internal information and privacy concerns. We do have a session after this that will address the more hairy details of it. Obviously, to reiterate that, following company guidelines when it comes to AI usage will be paramount here. And hopefully your company will have something set up, because it's a little bit of the Wild West in the beginning, but I totally think that is a valid concern to have, especially if it's like personal information rather than just guidelines.
Absolutely. And I think that we still don't have guidelines or regulations on this, just because it's so new. But we sure, I think that something like this is expected to happen, and every company should have some kind of regulation, just to make sure that you are not kind of exposing your internal and confidential data out to the world.
And then alternatively, you could also just use it as a skeleton and then input that data outside of the actual interface of the AI, if that's a concern as well.
Exactly.
And now here we are with
Exactly.
tone. Yes. So I think this is brought up earlier, and I think this has been, at least for me, one of the defining factors for using AI in my regular daily life, making sure that the tone is consistent. I think even for me, as someone who's like neurodivergent, sometimes I don't know where the line is or what I should or shouldn't be saying. So truthfully, having as descriptive and concise language as possible in your prompt to say, I want to sound witty, I want to sound warm, I want to sound encouraging. We've put in, requests for puns. They add emojis sometimes if you're supposed to be encouraging. It's been a real game changer, and I think that with this, you can also sort of carry out your branding or your language guidelines for the company as well. If you know there are certain words that are used, then you can input that. Actually, I think I might have gotten ahead of myself, Mina. Oh, here it is. Speak to your audience. So if you have certain, we've had some examples here. If you refer to your HR department as employee experience, if you have like your mission, your values, some very unique language that is specific to your company, these are things that you can add in to have that extra touch and keep things consistent across the board and bring your external and internal sort of marketing language together so everything's pretty cohesive and you're telling the same story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think speak to your audience is another big one. And I think it all ties into be specific, right? So we're all being specific about what tone we're using, what audience we're speaking to. And I think audience is very important because I tested out a few prompts where I am talking to a 4-year-old, for example, explaining something, and then talking to a professor at Harvard University. So the audience is very, very important. And in order to kind of keep it aligned, you can also use your company industry or the size of your company, right? So if you have a company size of 100 people, you can say, you can put in the prompt something like reach out with this HR update to a fintech company, 100 employees in this area, right? So everything that AI knows about companies up to 100 people in that specific area, it will use in order to kind of make the tone and more relevant content for that audience.
Yeah, we just had somebody who's following along at ChatGPT see the emojis for warm and friendly. I love it. It's like the rockets and the smiley faces. It's been very effective, and it does sort of remind me of all the exciting messages I've received for our internal comms where I was like, oh, that's adorable. So that's just another boon there. But I totally hear what you're saying. And I think that's such a cool exercise as well. Like talk to a 4-year-old, talk to a Harvard professor, because it opens the door for people to be like, okay, I sent out this communication on Wednesday. The feedback I've been getting is that nobody's really sure what I'm talking about, or like this concept is too comprehensive and far-reaching. Is there a way to distill this down and make sure that everybody's getting like the high level points? And then if they want to, we can have a further conversation and we have all this. I just think that like, I can only imagine that it saves a bunch of time versus, having to go to a colleague that you're like, you're really great at explaining things, like really great at boiling it down. But yeah, that's such a cool prompt in and of itself.
And I think Caleb has an interesting point here in the chat. He said, I'm finding it difficult to get the older generation of management or leadership to accept AI and take a step to develop internal usage guidelines. And I think that makes sense. I think every generation is having a hard time accepting new technology just because I think millennials grew up in that tech world. It's easier for us to accept new technology, right? So whatever new comes out, we're like, yes, give me more of that. That's going to make my life easier. But especially for maybe boomers or other generations that are not. So
boomers, Mina. Don't say that. Yeah, but go. Sorry.
You get what I'm saying exactly, and this is where I would use ChatGPT, so I don't sound too assertive because English is not my first language. So
no, but I think that's they also made the apt comparison of like it's like when the internet showed up and people were worried about like their brain waves and things of that nature. But I think that like at least for us, best practices have been starting small, starting simple. Just showing someone or demonstrating like the email thing, I think is a great way in. Like that became part of my daily life so quickly. And it was just a click of a button and a selection. I think AI can seem like this huge, like cloud of possibility, because it is in a way, but starting small and starting efficiently with those little day-to-day changes could be very helpful. But yeah, that's a topic that I think we'll probably be addressing later on, just in general, because that's really, really important, especially as you have workforces that are more mixed with intergenerational folks.
Yep, absolutely. And just a quick question from Kate here, and I think it's an important one. Can you input your company's content so that it can learn from your voice, tone, terminology, so that you don't have to insert those prompts with each session? And I think this is super important because yes, Kate, you can definitely do that. So whatever you give him as I don't know if it's him or I don't know how to to talk about. I'm just gonna call it AI. Whatever you give to AI, it's going to recognize the tonality or how the style of the text, and it can write whatever text you wanted based on what you gave him. So it goes kind of like, here's the example of the text. Please write dot 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 in the style of the text above, for example. So yeah, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah. And once again, with Katie as well, she said if the company guidelines are in place where you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last point to like Chris in the chat, really, it can be generational, it can be age based, but I think like even those that are younger, the idea about AI is still a bit intimidating, I would say. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, I think, let me see. One of the other things, one of the sort of stopgaps, not stopgaps, but things to check for, as we had mentioned, Mina, was making sure that you have up-to-date data, not relying it as like a primary source, or if you are looking in for research purposes, like what are the top 5 articles about this, this, and this? That's a great starting point. I wouldn't hang my hat on it just yet, especially as we're moving through the beginning and the medial stages of, AI growth and what it can do.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of questions regarding kind of companies' policies and how some of these folks are not allowed to use ChatGPT. I think that, I mean, we really don't know anything about that realm, but I think that the use is becoming more abroad, right? So many people, as you can see, all of you in this chat are using it and testing it out. So I think that people are going to be the ones who are going to make changes, even though for companies it's probably scary because they don't want their personal confidential information going out there, and it's certainly not safe. And again, that's just my opinion on it, just because you don't want to put out any kind of information. But for the time being, you can just start by using it safely, as we mentioned. So use it as a starting point. Don't input any confidential company information. And that's kind of the conclusion. Use it with in a safe and a structured way. Even though your company doesn't have one, use it so that nobody no confidential information are out there, because I think it's super beneficial and it can save a lot of time, and it would be a waste if you wouldn't use something that can help you do the job that you would have done in an hour in 10 minutes. You being more efficient, I don't think it's gonna be harm.
Yeah, I mean, with any new technology, there are benefits and drawbacks, and reticence to use, because it does seem like an unstoppable force. It's happening. It's already happened. So now it's about like being personally discerning, which I think, especially in the communication field, those folks really truly have to be every single day. So, yeah, and then relying on the company as well, and advocating for those guidelines, I think is pretty paramount. But I wanted to just quickly say for Amy, in terms of like bias and IP, that is an excellent conversation to have. For the more technical elements, we do have sessions coming up that those folks would be able to address it much better than Mina and I. But in terms of like bias in the platforms, I think that would be really, really cool to explore further. So you can always reach out to Mina and I via LinkedIn. But thank you everybody so much for the session and for the interaction. You all had great questions and great points, and I really enjoyed myself today. Mina?
Thank you so much. I loved all the engagement in the chat, and I hope I'm gonna connect with you all. So as Alex said, add us on LinkedIn if any questions weren't answered. And looking forward to what AI would bring.
Hi. Maybe I'll just do a quick intro to who I am. So my name is Tara. I've been with Staffbase for many, many years, and my whole job has always been around content and education for internal communications, which is why I've really just been diving into the topic of AI and what exactly that means for us. Over to you, Melanie.
So I've been interested in AI for a long time. I work at a company that does internal communications, or communication, and I oversee our creative and our technology and digital experience group. But I also studied computer science in college way back in the day, way before AI was what it is now and what generative AI means to the comms professional now. So it's been something I've been paying attention to probably all my career, but definitely something that's been a lot more prevalent in the last year as this has become a very hot and trending topic.
Absolutely. And because it's such a, I guess area where, especially with regard to the concerns, where we're all still trying to figure it out, right? No one has sort of complete answers, but we're all kind of in this together. We actually wanted to have a bit of I'm going to say collaborative session with you today and just get a little bit of a sense of where everyone's at and what everyone's main concerns are. So starting off with that, so the first question that we kind of had is like, if you think about one word that comes up when you think about the impact of AI and comms, what is that one word? Maybe you can just shoot that over in the chat for us.
And I know we're going to share a collage or a word cloud of some of the terms that have been produced in other surveys done with the same question. We also did this in a survey that we did for a group of communication leaders. The main word that came out is different than the one that we have that we're going to show you in a minute. But I think if anything, it was leaning towards positive and interested, right? Curious, excited. But there were a lot of concerns, and hopefully we can talk about a few of those today.
To the next page. So this is what, right, from the study that you were referring to, this is kind of what we got. I'm actually like full transparency, I don't see the chat right now on my end. So if someone could give me an idea of what kind of words are trickling in.
I see some really interesting ones. I see, mixed emotions, nervous, efficiency, transformative, fast-paced, fascinating, efficiency. We'll have to take all of those and make a word cloud of them, maybe after.
Yeah, absolutely. I also see unemployed.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of mixed emotions in that list.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say mine would probably be mixed emotions if I had to answer this question.
It's a challenging area, right? Because we know things are changing so quickly that even though you might be able to learn about something or feel confident in some tool that you've discovered that can help you be more productive, a month or two from now, something else will be introduced, or it'll become more sophisticated, or things will change, and then there's a lot of uncertainty as to where everything is going. So I can imagine, even if you feel okay about it now, the radius of this is ever expanding.
Yeah, that's so true. And like you say, changing. I was listening to something this morning that was talking about AI for drones and how they would be able to just assess everything and everyone in a certain area. And that's like, that's a whole other level. But then if I think about, creating content with it, there's like all these opportunities. So I think what you're saying is so true, that it's going to be a roller coaster, I think, emotionally for everyone over the coming weeks. Melanie, you actually shared this with me the other day, this study by We. Maybe you can just speak to this a little bit in terms of what exactly was found here for comms professionals, specifically around AI.
Definitely. And I think it's a good resource for most communicators to be taking a look at. There was a survey done in April and they released it in May. And it was specifically for communication professionals, trying to understand how people were feeling about it, what adoption looked like. I think the general consensus was that the adoption level was somewhat low and people were using it for content mostly. That was the biggest area. And in the survey, they go into some specifics around the types of content that people are generating with AI or the ways that they're utilizing it. But you can see there, it says only 16% of communication professionals feel knowledgeable about it. And that goes back to, I think, the list of adjectives that people came up with, that people are unsure about a lot of things, and they're not necessarily aware because there's so many applications that are launching. It's really hard to stay knowledgeable because everything's changing moment by moment. There are a lot of, in that survey, and it was in May, right? We're in June now, and there's probably additional information, and there's different things that have already launched since that survey came out. People have responded about, how they're using it, but also how it's being regulated a bit, right? What their concerns are around privacy, around confidential information being shared, around inherent bias. There's a lot of that data in there, so it's helpful just to see what other people are concerned about and paying attention to. And I think the long and short of it is we don't have all the answers, and that survey doesn't necessarily share them all, but it does highlight the fact that everybody else is suffering through the same feelings and the same experience, and that everybody's a little concerned about what's gonna happen and how it's gonna affect them.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those concerns I also find they're quite unique to communication within a company, right? Because we have that whole question of, well, can we actually input the data that we have? Can we, if this is confidential information, we can't actually, kind of use this in any kind of external tool. And then there's the alternative to actually, set up your own tool and kind of feed it with information. And we sort of kind of wanted to check in a little bit and see what I'm going to say sort of the overall temperature is here within everyone who's joined us today. Like, how are you actually feeling about the impact of AI in your lives? There should be a poll popping up where you'll be able to choose between excited, worried, both, or neither. How do you feel about it, Melanie?
So I'm excited, but that's because I've spent a lot of time understanding at least the way that it's built, right? There's, I guess, maybe a little bit of both in there, but I don't look at it as worry as much as I look at it as like, how do you get ahead of the things that are concerns? There's always this philosophy, though, the technology can be used by bad actors, right? The idea that you're going to get a phishing call now from somebody who's using the audio voice of your mother or your coworker or something, right? Like, much more sophisticated way of tricking people, right? But then there's also the other side of it, where AI is being used for so many good things in the world, right? The ability to diagnose diseases more quickly, the ability to create productivity tools that help, everyday people, the idea that it might be able to be leveraged in education to create a more level playing field and get access to education and tutoring even for, people who previously wouldn't have been able to access that. So there's a lot of positive things in the world, and I like to think that the glass is half full. And that those positive things could maybe counterbalance the negative things that are popping up as well.
Yeah, just as you were saying that, it just made me think, like, I guess it's kind of like everything else, being a human being, right? It's like we can always do great things, and we can always destroy ourselves. We're kind of always at the that intersection between the two, and we just all gotta keep our fingers crossed that we'll be smart and we'll be wise. Which is, I think, especially important just to have a lot of dialogue around this at the moment and just understand where we're at and to make sure we make informed decisions. So our answer here for this is actually, so we have 68% saying both, 25% saying excited, 4% are worried, and 4% are neither. And I actually pulled this poll from a survey published like about 3 days ago by The Verge. It was done with, I think, around 2,000 people who took part in this. And I see in our group, we have a lot more both than they had. So we had 68%, right? So which is double. And I think that's also honestly where I find myself. I think majority of the time I'm excited. I come from content, and I just see all the opportunities to create just content in a, I wouldn't necessarily only say quicker way, but also actually in a way to be able to shorten things a lot more, because we are super overwhelmed with content overall. And it's a very phase of experimenting. I think if you're within content, it was also interesting, to listen earlier to what we can do with prompting. Like, one of the things I did recently is just to kind of throw in some of my own writing and then ask what that style would be called, right? Or what sort of the words are that I would need if I wanted to create prompts that kind of reflect what I was doing in my writing. And it was interesting because I've never analyzed my own writing, and suddenly there was this analysis of this is what you do, these are the mechanisms that you use. And we have sort of one more question as we kind of dive into going into the concerns, and that would be like actually knowing from here within the group, like what are your biggest concerns around the impact of AI? We'll cover like 3 big ones that I think are that have also come up, you know, over the conversation earlier. But I'd be quite curious just to hear if those are also the ones that are interesting for everyone here, or if there's other things, so that we can make sure that we try to address what we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a question or two in there. And I know in the last session, there were a lot of questions coming up about privacy and bias and other things. So I know they touched briefly on a few of those things, and hopefully we can answer a few questions today, or at least have a discussion about them, since a lot of them are open-ended. And some basic tips on how to put some stopgaps in place so that you can give the people on your team and the people that you work with every day some context as to how to use these tools initially, and a roadmap for maybe keeping aware of what's coming down the pike, so you don't find the rules that you put in place now completely obsolete and irrelevant, and endangering your company, 2 months from now when a bunch of things change.
I see we have a lot of privacy misinformation coming in. Regulation, bias, regulation, imposters.
One of the things, obviously all of these are top of mind for a lot of the companies out there, and their communications team. They're larger teams that can use these things. A lot of development teams are using them, and using them to help code, which I think is one of the areas. In that study we shared, the 2 areas that they found that ChatGPT and other language models like it will probably be more prevalent are in code, writing code, and in writing content, right? Those are the 2 big places where we're seeing its impact now already. And there's a lot of privacy concerns because there was a survey done by a cybersecurity company that basically found like 11% of employees have copied confidential information into ChatGPT. And that includes, everything from looking at code to looking at just taking a survey or a document a transcription even of a meeting, and then dropping that in to try and get a summarized set of themes, not necessarily thinking through what's in there and then feeding that into the larger system. And it learns from what you input, right? It rebalances its outputs based on every single user's inputs. And so it's learning about your company and about confidential information when that happens.
I mean, that's one of those things, like, how do you regulate that, right? Because you won't even know, like, so that's one of those things where I'm just like, it's a good idea to set up these kind of regulations, but I mean, it's up to the individual to make a decision, and you don't see, sort of the interaction that other people have had with the system. So I guess you'll find out sort of on the other end if the information appears somewhere else, but other than that.
Well, yeah, I think there was a bug that happened with OpenAI's ChatGPT, I think back in March or April, where it started to populate chat, like, it stores your chat history. And it populated the chat history with the titles from other users' chats because it's learning and it's not filtering that out. And they were like, oh, that's a bug. We probably shouldn't be sharing other people's chat titles with the users.
Probably not.
It's a big deal. There are companies that are actually banning the use of it. I think that was mentioned in the last session as well. Yeah. They are creating their own proprietary language models. And I think now that the technology exists, people know how it's built, right? They understand the neural networks that it's built on. A lot of companies are trying to adopt their own models so that they can serve up their own models and keep information private. There are also other language models other than ChatGPT. That's the one everyone knows. And that's the one that is most familiar to people. But there are other ones out there that are trying to put more proprietary controls in place, privacy controls, to help be able to not feed certain information into the learning algorithms, but rather just use it as a standalone. Here's the information we can give you from this, but I'm not learning from it. So that's an evolving field and an evolving area that hopefully will alleviate some of the issues around privacy.
Yeah. And we will, I think the second topic that we brought along is also related to the area of guidelines. The first one that we actually brought along for today is the question of, someone wrote earlier, the first word you think about when AI is unemployment, right? Is AI coming for our jobs, or is it actually an opportunity to do something else, to learn about it, to work with it? What do you think about this, Melanie?
So it's a good question. A lot of people, I think, have talked about this already, even in earlier sessions, but there's a new skill set, I think, evolving from this whole experience. There's this prompt engineering, if you will. Will that be a skill set that's needed for the long term? I don't know, because these models are also getting more sophisticated. So they may be learning more from simplified prompts over time. It might be easier to do this. But if you think about it, we are now the developers, right? You don't need a developer to work with an AI language model. Your words, your inputs are the development code. You are the ones, telling it, here, I'm inputting this information, and this is the style I want it in, this is the context. And so the ability to engineer those prompts is really what's a skill set that's going to be desperately needed by most professionals that are using these tools, and specifically in comms, if you're using them for content and that kind of thing. Understanding how to really get it and engineer it to what you need it to be is actually an opportunity, I think, right? The better you get at that, learning that skill and embracing it and really exploring it is going to make you a lot more efficient, and using these tools a lot more rewarding than if you don't have that and then you're constantly getting the wrong answer. So I don't think it's replacing our role, because it still needs input, still needs to understand. It is really good at summarizing and at natural language translations, things like that, at task-based execution. It is not, it doesn't have the context and sensitivity of a larger, human brain that can think about all of the different parameters that might need to come into play when you think about what you need to do to communicate a certain topic, or to work through a certain issue. So the thinking is really that it's a layer on top of what your existing skill set is, and that it's going to allow you to stay in the creative and strategic space more, because it'll handle the productivity tasks for you.
Yeah, that's so true. I see it like the same way, that it's actually sort of someone said this to me the other day. They were saying there's an opportunity that, as a human being, you get to do what's really interesting, and the stuff, that's sort of always regular and the same, you can kind of outsource. We did a prompting webinar yesterday as well, and it was kind of focused on one of the examples was what if you took something like writing the message for the annual survey, right? So maybe that's something that you've done a couple of years in a row, and it's not really something interesting or engaging anymore. And it's these types of things. I know the first thing that I did was I had to terminate my phone contract in Germany or something like that, and I was like, oh my god, let me just put in the 3 bullets, and within 30 seconds I had the email, and I could just send it off. And otherwise it would have taken me a lot of time to kind of compose the stuff. And I think in the professional context it's the same thing. There are certain things you can sort of outsource to the to that support. I really see it as support, especially in a sort of, if content is part of the work that you're doing and writing is part of the work, and also for brainstorming, just the kind of speed at which you're able to come up with ideas. And I think my perspective on it is kind of it's just, we got a different tool. It's not we've got a more powerful tool. Before that, you would still look for that information, but it would just take a lot longer to find it, because you would have to Google and go to a thesaurus and maybe talk to someone and sleep on it. And so I just feel like the speed at which you're able to keep up with just what is demanded by sort of information today, that just it makes it a lot quicker. There was someone here that wrote in the chat, and this is also, I think, a perspective I find quite true, which is AI is coming for the jobs of communicators who don't learn how to use AI, right? So I think there's also really an opportunity here actually to pioneer how to work with this and how to use it for communication within the company, through actually going and learning about it, seeing how to use it, and getting involved in these types of conversations that are so difficult to figure out how do we navigate it, and how do we go forward from here.
That's right. I would say too that as communicators, a lot of people, we focus on the words and the creative and the storytelling, care a little less about the technology piece, but I do think it's incumbent upon every single person in the workforce to actually pay attention and to understand how these models function, what's happening with them. I know it sometimes can be a little, like, it hurts your brain a little bit to spend time understanding what's happening and getting into the technology behind a lot of this. But when policies are being made and when you need to figure out how this impacts your workforce, what policies you're going to put in place, what you're encouraging people to do with it, a lot of times you'll see IT and maybe the executive team sitting at the table trying to make these decisions without that human perspective that comes from communicators and HR. So it's really important that you have a voice inside of that conversation and that communicators educate themselves and lean into the whole idea of digital fluency, AI fluency. Like, don't be scared of it, so that you can be good at it in your own job, but also that you can speak intelligently to it when it comes to actually creating these policies. And one of the things that I recommend, our company recommends, is the idea of a cross-functional team to really look at this, a task force, if you will, to be able to analyze from different perspectives the impacts of AI and the things that you as a company or your team needs to be able to consider and keep in mind as everything evolves. I think somebody asked in the chat even about how to craft a policy or if there are tips. And I think that's the first thing, right? I don't think anybody should do it in a vacuum as their own individual person. I think cross-functional group of people that have perspectives and how it's being used on the technology side, from the human perspective, from the company confidentiality perspective, can really help to coalesce around something that will work for your company and that will make sense and help protect everyone.
With the aspect of time, I think I'll actually move on to our second concern, which is, this whole thing of like misinformation. How do we know what's real, what's fake? Yeah, I think like one of the key sort of points that I've just been hearing in a lot of the conversations I've been in is just like it comes down to who's saying it, right? And whether you can trust the source, whether you can trust the channel, and making sure that stays, well, that's basically the only thing that you really have, because you can't believe your eyes anymore. Like I think Frank said this in the first session as well. So who can you believe? You have to trust each other, which is, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, particularly in the image space, right? That there's a lot of sophistication around the image models and the things that they can create. I think there was an instance in the US where somebody put out an image of the Pentagon on fire that was generated by AI. It wasn't even a good one. Like, it was very obviously AI, but it made the stock market drop and people reacted in the moment to that. And it actually impacted real world lives, right? Like real people's investments were affected by somebody's fake image. And so I think there's an important factor that we all take responsibility for the things that we create, and kind of taking an ethical stand on how we do that, but also have an awareness of what is being created out there, and always be a little skeptical. Trust but verify, right? When it comes to the text-based models and the kinds of content that they generate, I mean, there's been a lot of stories about lawyers citing cases that weren't real. And I think, if anything, it's just telling the story that you shouldn't be utilizing it for fact-based information, right? It's not a fact generator. It's not an encyclopedia that's been verified by 5,000 sources. It's taking inputs that it found in the very vast recesses of the digital interwebs, if you will, and taking all of that information and coalescing it around thoughts and ideas, and then it outputs that. So it makes things up. It uses fake information to inform itself, and that needs to just be an understanding that you have going into using any of these tools, so that you're not taking it at face value, because it's not always going to be accurate, and that might not be the best way to find your information. In fact, something like a search engine result gives you the ability as a human being to evaluate answers and then to decide, okay, this is the one that feels the most accurate. Don't take the one answer that you get from an AI-based chat generator as the end-all be-all source, and really use it for the things that it's good at, which is, crafting different variations of content, or giving you some brainstorming ideas, or the things that kind of the soft skills, the simple things, and not necessarily the research piece.
We had just a comment here talking about like like the ability how to fact check images and videos, right, as a part of digital fluency. And it just made me think like what you were saying earlier as well, Melanie, to the point that right now, sort of the input is, you know, prompt engineering maybe is a thing now, but we don't really know what's coming next, right? So as we're learning about AI is also learning, right? And it's just kind of growing. So I honestly really wonder how we will be able to solve this one, because oh, sorry, I was just looking at the time and seeing that we should probably move on to our
and there's always a hope that there's a positive in the future. You can go to the next one, but the positive in the future might be that there's AI tools that will counterbalance. The good AI tools will counterbalance the bad ones, right? And maybe there's a way to make sure that there's a, you know, digital signature of some sort that's identifying AI generated images. I don't know. I'm hoping that there's a technology out there. If anything, regulation is needed to help solve this, right? Anybody who's running an AI based language model that other people are utilizing should have regulations in place on what it can and can't do.
And that actually brings us to the third concern, which we've already kind of discussed a little bit here and there. I do believe there should be a poll popping up now as well, just asking you if you think we need them or we don't. And from the conversation so far, I have a pretty clear idea of what the answer to that will be. And just to share with you in the meantime, so this also comes from the survey from The Verge that I was referring to earlier, and it's just super clear, like for everything, we're all like, this is not working the way it's working right now. Like the future looks a little bit scary. Like we have to figure out how to do that. Melanie, you spoke earlier already a little bit to how this could be done in an organization, like with a sort of bringing a group of people together. Like how would you go about setting something like that up?
So I think, there's a team, a cross-functional team that could be created to just talk about these issues, to identify the ones that could, in the immediate near term, affect your company, and that that group or that steering committee, if you will, would need to be something that is flexible and moldable over time, because obviously things change, and so any policies or ideas that you put in place now need to be reevaluated as the tools are changing and become more sophisticated. Some companies have gone as far as to say we won't create any AI generated images or AI generated video of our own employees and executives. And so that gives you the ability to then understand if something is different or is used, that it is either a fake or it is the authentic thing from your company. And so it gives you at least a sense that, like, I know as a company, we're not doing that. We're not going to use AI generated video of our executives. But it is up to every company to determine what makes sense for them, right? What's going to work and what has all of those perspectives included in it, and encouraging as individuals and humans to encourage our government to actually, pay attention to this. There's an open petition that people are signing that has like signees from all of the different leaders of these different AI model companies like OpenAI and others, and scientists and PhDs, basically a petition saying we need regulation and we need focus on this so that it doesn't become something out of control. And I signed it. I encourage people to sign it, and just to stand up for the fact that we know we want to make sure that we keep ourselves safe. But there's no clear solution yet. But what I would say is take some of the smart people that you work with every day that have different perspectives and try to come up with a solution that will work for your company.
And I think that's so true to think about, what's that, like really what's your situation like? I think one of the things that really just crossed my mind as well a lot the last days is just, if we're talking about if the channel is the place where you can kind of be sure, like just making sure that you build that trust right now and like communicate quickly and say how you're going to navigate the situation so that, I think if you get into a situation where something was created with AI, people didn't know about it and they found out after the fact, like rebuilding that trust, I think that ship will have sailed. I think it's something that you got to do early on and say, hey, we're aware of this, we're navigating this, this is how we're gonna tackle it. Because I think that's something that is probably very hard to recover from.
That's right. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary. Welcome back.
Hello. Yes.
Right at the end of the sentence. Good timing.
Yeah, perfect. I was just going to say, is that all you had to share? I know we're getting at time here.
I mean, we'd love to answer all the questions in chat, but I don't think we're going to get to a lot of them. So we can always follow up with some of the specifics, since there's some very specific ones in there.
And I think our LinkedIn was also shared. So please connect with us and we'll be happy to answer anything that you shoot our way, or try to anyways.
It feels like everyone is talking about AI right now. Is this the end of the communications profession as we know it? Well, we don't think so. Communicators are people movers. That's a big job. AI can't transform your organization for you. But if it's done right, it can save you time so that you can focus on what matters. At Staffbase, we want you to stay in the driver's seat. But what about having a personal assistant? Introducing Staffbase Companion, enterprise-ready AI, hosted by Microsoft. Power up your comms with great style and structure. Summaries in seconds. Jazzier titles and teasers. And a quick fix for writer's block. And this? It's just the beginning. Staff-based Companion makes comms easier for both the editor and the reader. Book your demo to see it in action.